Welcome back to another Deck Tech, everybody. My name is Nathan. This is the Salty Productions YouTube channel. Today we are talking about a Super Friends list helmed by the Prismatic Bridge. This is a personal brew that I've spent a lot of time and philosophizing about because Planeswalkers and Commander tend to not be a very good permanent type. However, we have built this list to be very explosive, cheat a bunch of Planeswalkers into play, and then use their ultimate abilities. If you like content like this, please leave a like on the video. Always appreciate it, and feel free to subscribe for more content like this. And also I want to shout out that normally I create a companion video to go along with videos like this, where you can actually see me play out 2 or 3 complete goldfishes of the deck up to about turn 7 or turn 8. So I will have a companion video for this deck tech down in the description below. Now, this deck is also unique in that it is my most expensive deck, both mana-wise and dollar-wise. If we scroll down here to our custom mana cost, in Moxfield we can tweak the mana cost so that we can actually see the real curve of our deck here, and we are coming in at a whopping 5.0 average mana cost. Look at this curve, ladies and gentlemen. You might be asking yourself, Nathan, are you insane? How would I ever survive in a game of Commander when my average spell cost is 5? And the reason for that is because we are running a ton of a land and mana acceleration. This is a big ramp deck with walkers as the payoff, ladies and gentlemen. Also, it should be noted that our deck is particularly expensive. This is because the mana base is very much focused on fixing its colors, and so it is running 8 of the OG dual lands. If you strip those out of the deck, that can cut about $2,500 off of the deck, which would put this right around the 1,500 range would be my estimate if you were to actually assemble these in TCG Player, for example. In addition, you could cut a lot of the fetch lands to shave off probably another $300 or so. The mana base has to be expensive because we're running a very color intensive build, and we want to be able to cast the Prismatic Bridge once we have the mana to do so. Now, before we get into the individual card discussion, let me just talk about our general game plan. So for that, I actually have our handy dandy little tool here, Excel. Oops, I'm sorry. Let's jump back to our plan here. So turn 1, a lot of the time we're going to have a Triumph in our hand, and we're just going to play a tapped land. Turn 2 and turn 3 are going to be focused on playing ramp spells, things like 3 visits, open the way, expand the sphere, etc. Turn 4, we're going to be able to cast the Prismatic Bridge. One of the fun aspects of this deck is that if you get Prismatic Bridge to stick around for a while, it will generate a ton of value, but it becomes a giant target. And so we want to cast the Prismatic Bridge, but we also want to watch out for a time when it is safe to do so. So assuming our Prismatic Bridge will survive once we cast it, we will then follow that up with a spell that cheats a lot of our Planeswalkers into play that we have in our hand or from our deck. And then we will cast a spell that once those walkers into play, we will put extra counters on them, with the goal of possibly alting by turn 6, more often probably by turn 7, but turn 6 is the goal. From there, we will follow that up with more Planeswalkers, or using our Planeswalkers abilities to remove creatures off the board if we don't have an ultimate yet. But if we do manage to ultimate on turn 6, we can then leverage all of that value generation to essentially close the game via combat in the next couple of turns. Now, let's take a look at what our walkers are doing. And this is where I'd like to get into a little bit of a philosophical discussion about Super Friends and Commander. Now, the general problem with Planeswalkers and Commander is that they really require a full build around because they generally are very expensive mana-wise for what you get in reality, because opponents have 3 opportunities to attack your Planeswalkers as opposed to 1 in 1v1 formats. And so most Planeswalkers are actually designed for 1v1 formats, and WotC has explicitly stated that they are limiting the number of new Planeswalkers that they're going to be releasing in new sets. I believe they're limited to like 1 or 2% going forward, because they are just generally not very well designed for Commander. So how do we get around that? Well, generally, if we admit to ourselves that we're playing a very vulnerable permanent, we want these vulnerable permanents to be doing very specific things for us. First, we want to be able to draw cards off of it, assuming that it will get removed, at least we can guarantee some value will go back to our hand. Second, we want to be able to generate defense for these planeswalkers and these permanents that are generally weak to combat. So we want blockers. And so that means we're going to want to be generating tokens, which can also be used to close out the game once we are able to successfully clear the board and swing in for the win. We also want to be removing our opponent's things so that we at least trade 1-for-1 if our planeswalkers happen to be attacked and hated out of the game. So when we look at what do we want our planeswalkers to be doing, it generally boils down to these categories, which I've plotted out here. So most of our planeswalkers for free via their plus ability are going to be drawing cards, generating blockers, and removing stuff. There are a couple of instances of burn to help us actually push the game to a close, but those are ancillary compared to our primary game plan. There's also a couple of unique cases where Vronis, for example, will phase out other planeswalkers, and then there's also some other planeswalker synergy that Commodore Guff grants us by putting extra counters on our walkers. Now, with the minus ability, these are going to be used more sparingly and only when we have to, and so it's important that we make these abilities count. We can see that the vast majority of our planeswalkers can remove something off of the board or draw us cards once again. And then we also, I guess you could sort of count board wipes towards the removal category, but this will save your bacon in the case that we have a lot of creatures coming our way, and then more burn here to push the game towards a close. Now, there's also another metric by which I evaluate my planeswalkers, and that is what is their ultimate able to do once we reach it. Now, I divide this into two categories: alts that can immediately win us the game on the spot, or alts that are sort of mid-power, but powerful enough that they will push us towards a closure of the game within the next couple of turns. So in these examples, Liliana Dreadhorde General will generally force our opponents to sacrifice all their permanents. Nicobola's Dragon God will force losses for players who don't control legendary permanents, for example. So these are the types of abilities that we want, and each and every planeswalker that we choose has to push us towards an offensive win for the game. That does not revolve around an infinite combo. I will note that the Chain Veil is intentionally missing from this list because I've actually found it's quite slow for what it does. There's a bunch of infinite combos that you can put in for things like Teferi and things like that, which the goal of this deck is not to combo off. Rather, it is to generate insane amounts of board value and then ultimately close via combat. All right, so let's jump into what our commander is actually looking to do. So the Prismatic Bridge is a WUBRG commander that says at the beginning of your upkeep, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature or a planeswalker card, put that card onto the battlefield and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. In this deck, the Prismatic Bridge functions as one of our best sort of cheat spells that we can keep in the command zone. We are almost always going to want to play the Prismatic Bridge instead of its flip side, Esika, God of the Tree, which can function as a 3-mana mana dork if we are not hitting our ramp. It should be noted that if we cannot reliably get to 5 mana with all of our 5 colors, it is perfectly okay to play Esika and hope essentially that you will hit a planeswalker cheat spell along the way. So don't be afraid to hit that red button and cast Esika. Now, what are we ultimately looking to do first? We want to cast our 3 and 2 mana ramp spells to get to 5 mana as fast as we can. So I'm actually going to breeze through our ramp spells because a lot of these are format staples, and so you'll recognize a lot of them. Cultivate, Expand the Sphere has extra synergies because it can proliferate us. Farseek will color fix us. Flare of Cultivation is new from Modern Horizons 3, where we probably won't be able to sack a non-token green creature, but we're happy to play this as a regular Cultivate for 3 mana. Gatewatch Beacon is a 3-mana mana rock that has extra synergy for planeswalkers, and we're happy to play a 3-mana mana rock to be able to boost our planeswalker loyalty, because that can be the difference between an ultimate or a bust. Kodama's Reach, another card that will guarantee that we reach 5 mana to play Prismatic Bridge. Nature's Lore is going to be a a 2-mana ramp spell. Open the Way can be very flexible. We generally want to play this for a total of 4 mana or 5 mana to get us up to that 5 mana mark. Rampant Growth, Ranger's Path will get us 2 forest cards to fix our colors. Skyshard Claim, similar thing, but they come in untapped. Staff of Completion can help us ramp for mana of any color, and it can help us proliferate, so another 3 mana rock that we are happy to cast. And then 3 Visits is just always a solid 2 mana ramp spell. All right, so with our ramp out of the way, let's jump into the meat of the deck. What are we actually going to be playing that is going to generate us all of this advantage? Now, our cheat spells start with Academy Rector. So when this dies, we can search for an enchantment card and put that card into play. So you might be asking, what enchantments are we running? And of course, we are running Doubling Season, which is probably what we're going to be getting the vast majority of the time. If we want to convert that effect into future creatures, we can play a Defense of the Heart, which will allow us to tutor out 2 creature cards from our deck into play if our opponents control 3 or more creatures during our upkeep. We can also play Oath of Teferi off of that. That would probably be the second option. And then we can also get rampant card draw via Protection Racket, Black Market Connections, and also if we happen to have a lot of Planeswalkers on the board and we want to go for an ultimate, we can play Resourceful Defense and then pay 5 to then move any number of counters from a Planeswalker we currently have to another Planeswalker to allow it to ultimate. Urza Symbols the Titan can also get us Planeswalkers into our hands and onto the field, but this is probably a lower priority tutor. So our next spell here is Amanitu's Augury, which is 8 mana. Exile the top 8 cards of your library. You may put a land card from among them onto the field until end of turn for each non-land card type. You may cast a spell of that type from among the exiled cards without paying its mana cost. So let's go back to our types here. We're going to almost always be able to hit that land drop. We've got a decent mix here of different non-land types with 22 sorceries, 19 planeswalkers, 10 creatures, 7 enchantments, 3 artifacts, and 1 instant. So Amanitu's Augury is going to be great, and one of the reasons why this is also in the deck is that it can be searched up via an emergent ultimatum. So this says search your library for up to 3 mono-colored cards with different names and exile them. An opponent chooses one of those cards, shuffle that into your library, and then you may cast the others without paying their mana cost. So most of the time what we're going to be casting off of an emergent ultimatum will be Amanitu's Augury, like I just mentioned. Then we'll also grab a Sylvala Stampede, which will theoretically let us cheat a bunch more Planeswalkers from our deck and our hand into play. So we would want to allow the Amanitus to resolve first in case we hit some card draw. Then we would let the Sylvala Stampede resolve next. And then what we would probably want to choose next is a Deep Glow Skate. And I think that our opponents would probably exile the Deep Glow Skate as the most valuable spell potentially, because if they would allow this to be cast for free, then that almost guarantees a Planeswalker ultimate with allowing one of these other spells to resolve first. So that's been my experience playing this deck, and so you can reliably count on the Amanitus and or Sylvala Stampede to get in there, and then if Deep Glow Skate happens to be allowed to cast, then we basically get an ultimate, which is pretty sweet. We also have an Arena Rector, which is a Planeswalker version of Academy Rector, where we get to tutor up a Planeswalker card, put it on the battlefield once this dies. It should be noted that this deck is very wanting for blockers, and so we are relying on using these Academy Rectors and Arena Rectors to be able to block in combat, and even if they don't block to get the death trigger, they make a very good rattlesnake for this particular list to disincentivize our opponents from attacking our Planeswalkers and our face. Creative Technique is a 5-mana spell with Demonstrate, which means when we cast it, we may copy it, but we get to choose an opponent to also copy it. Shuffle your library, then reveal cards from the top until you reveal a non-land card, exile that card, and put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. You may cast the exiled card without paying its mana cost. So this is essentially a Prismatic Bridge effect, but it will hit the first non-land card, so it doesn't bypass all of our instants and sorceries, which is perfectly fine because we get 2 of these triggers for the same amount of mana. And of course with Demonstrate, you can target the opponent that you think would probably be the least effective. Perhaps there's a Storm deck at the table mill or something like that, or maybe perhaps a ramp deck where you might be able to hit a ramp spell off of that. Or you could even choose an opponent who is behind and you can curry some favor with to not incentivize them to not attack your planeswalkers. So a lot of political maneuvering potential is in this card. Defense of the Heart is a 4-mana enchantment. During your upkeep, if one of your opponents controls 3 or more creatures, sack Defense of the Heart, then tutor up those creatures and put those into play. Now with Defense of the Heart, what we're going to want to be looking for is generally Deep Glow Skate once again if we have planeswalkers on the field. Otherwise, if not, Etali Primal Conqueror makes for an excellent choice. We automatically get 4 spells off the top of each player's deck, and then also we can play a Vorinclex. If we need blockers, we can play a Coma Cosmos Serpent, or if we need a ton of mana, we can play a Nyxbloom Ancient as well. But I think most of the time, what we're going to be grabbing is an Etali Primal Conqueror, allowing that to resolve first, and then we would allow our Deep Glow Skate to then resolve next, so that if we have planeswalkers come out of the Etali trigger, we can immediately ultimate them. Next, we have Deploy the Gatewatch, 6-mana sorcery. Look at the top 7 cards of your library, put up to 2 planeswalker cards from among them onto the battlefield, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Now, this is a tricky spell, and what I think of Deploy the Gatewatch as is actually just 1 planeswalker. So on average, our planeswalkers cost 6 mana, and so we are running, let me actually switch views here, we are running 19 planeswalkers. So if we do the math here, our chances to hit, if we take 19 divided by, let's say that we cast this by turn 5, and so we've drawn 4 cards, which would make 12 cards come out of our deck. So we would take 19 divided by 99 minus 12, with the 99 minus 12 in parentheses, and that would be 87, I believe. So 19 divided by 87 gives us a 0.21 percentage, and then we multiply that by our count of 7. So on average, we'll hit 1.5 planeswalkers with Deploy the Gatewatch. And again, we are happy if we hit 1 because we are thinking of this as a planeswalker spell that has the potential upside to grab us another walker. Etali Primal Conqueror, we've already sort of covered. 7 mana, 7/7 trample. When it ETBs, we're going to exile cards from the top until we exile a non-land card. And then for each player, we may cast any number of spells from among them without paying their costs. And then as an emergency game closing button, we can transform it into essentially a Blightsteel Colossus with 11 power toughness with trample and indestructible. All right, and then we have Etali Primal Storm, the slower version of Etali Primal Conqueror. This will, again, just generate us mana and card advantage to hopefully cast a walker off the top of our library, but we're happy to hit additional ramp or any other spell that we exile from the top of our library. Then we have Genesis Storm, 6-mana sorcerer. When you cast a spell, copy it for each time you've cast your commander from the command zone this game, which will always be at least once because we will want to play the Prismatic Bridge before we cast Genesis Storm. And then we will reveal cards from the top of our library until we reveal a non-land permanent card. You may put that card onto the battlefield, then put all cards revealed this way that weren't put on the battlefield on the bottom. So Genesis Storm is going to trigger twice, and if we look at our permanent types here, 19 of them are planeswalkers, 10 of them are creatures, which I would say still the majority of our creatures we want to hit for free. I mean, imagine casting a Etali Primal Conqueror for free off of that into an Etali Primal Storm. Just absolutely ridiculous. And then the only permanents that we probably wouldn't want to hit with this would be our Gatewatch Beacon or our Staff of Completion. And even our Ichormoon Gauntlet would be good to get off of Genesis Storm for free because it gives us that extra proliferate ability, which we'll talk about in a little bit. All right, so our next cheat spell here is Kodama of the East Tree, which is going to allow us to cheat up permanents, 6/6 reach for 6 whenever another permanent ETB is under your control. If it wasn't put on a battlefield with this ability, you may put a permanent card with equal or lesser CMC from your hand onto the battlefield. So this will get you lands. Once you play land drops, you get essentially an extra land drop for the turn. And then once we are cheating out all these planeswalkers, we can start playing permanents from our hand for free. So the ideal case would be to have Kodama be slammed onto the board, play another planeswalker after that, and then we get to cast another one for free, essentially. Narset Enlightened Master is a 6-mana 3/2 human monk with first strike and hexproof. When it attacks, exile the top 4 cards of your library until end of turn. You may cast non-creature spells from among these cards without paying their costs. So this is going to grab us all of our instants, sorceries, artifacts, and planeswalkers, and we have only 10 creatures in the deck, so our chances to hit with this are pretty large, and on average, I think each attack would get us about 5 to 6 mana worth of value. So Vala Stampede is one of my favorite cards in the deck. Council's Dilemma for 6 mana, starting with you. Each player votes for wild or free. For each wild vote, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card. Put those creature cards onto the battlefield. Then, for each free vote, we may put a permanent card from our hand onto the battlefield. So this is not limited to creatures. We can slam our planeswalkers, just being generic permanents, onto the field for free with this. And generally, you're always going to want to vote. We would vote for wild because we want to dig cards out of our deck, which would be essentially card advantage. And then the free vote is the mana advantage component. Generally, your opponents will always vote for free because it's better to give your opponent mana advantage than card advantage. So we'll be able to just play out all of our planeswalkers once the spell resolves. Urza assembles the Titan 5-mana saga with read ahead. That is a key word within this card because Chapter 1, scry 4, then you may reveal the top card of your library. If a planeswalker card is revealed this way, put it into your hand. Chapter 2, you may put a planeswalker card of mana value 6 or less from your hand onto the battlefield. Or Chapter 3, you may activate the loyalty abilities of planeswalkers you control twice this turn rather than only once. Now, the read is very important because if we're playing this for generic value, we'll want it to trigger on Chapter 1, where we can actually top deck manipulation planeswalkers into our hand, but perhaps I would say 50% of the time we're going to actually read ahead to Chapter 2, which is going to allow us to play a planeswalker card for free from our hand onto the battlefield, so that immediately next turn we can get to Chapter 3, which is you may activate the loyalties abilities of planeswalkers in control twice this turn rather than only once, to just propel our planeswalkers in to further get towards that ultimate. All right, so with that out of the way, let's jump to what are our walkers. Now, this is one of the few parts of this video where I'm going to actually skip a lot of this text. One thing you'll notice with playing Superfriends decks is that because there's so much text on the cards, you have to read fast and you have to plan out your lines quickly because this deck can very easily overwhelm you with the various lines that you can play because you have so many dials at your disposal. So it might help in some cases to simply shortcut a lot of these explanations for your opponents to explain what the planeswalker is looking to do, or to even just ask your opponents if you want to explain what the card does, because it will simply take minutes out of their day. Ajani Unyielding, I'm going to summarize as its +2 is going to put non-land permanent cards into our hand, and then -2 is removal, where its controller will gain life. So again, card draw and removal in our walkers, in case it comes down early. Both of those modes are going to be useful, or its ultimate ability is going to essentially almost push us towards the end of the game by buffing all of our creatures. And I will also remind you that tokens is sort of a sub-theme of this deck. We want to be generating blockers. We want to be buffing them with these ultimate type of abilities to swing out for the win. Chandra Awakened Inferno is played for its +2, where each opponent gets an emblem with at the beginning of your upkeep. This emblem deals 1 damage to you, but it can also function as a board wipe. So really both modes, both of our +2 and -3 modes are valuable no matter what stage of the game. And its -X is a targeted removal spell that we're probably not going to use that much, but it will function as a red button for removal if we need it. Commodore Guff is going to be great if we play it before before all of our other planeswalkers because at the beginning of your end step, put a loyalty counter on another target planeswalker you control just as a static ability, but his +1 will create a blocker for us that can generate mana, and then his -3 ability is to draw cards and burn our opponents, which is great in the late game. Elspeth's Son's Champion is going to be able to create a bunch of tokens, also function as a board wipe, and her ultimate will get us a lot closer towards closing out of the game via combat by giving our creatures +2/+2 and flying. Garruk Apex Predator is going to function most of the time as either a token generator or removal spell because it can destroy another target planeswalker or put a 3/3 beast creature token with Death Touch onto the battlefield. And again, we can also destroy target creature as a -3. Now, the -8 will almost basically lose the game for an opponent because they get an emblem with whenever a creature attacks you, gets +5/+5 and gains trample until end of turn, basically ending the game for them. Garruk Cursed Huntsman, 5 loyalty planeswalker. Its 0 cost is to create 2 wolf creature tokens with whenever the creature dies, put a loyalty counter on each Garruk you control. Synergy, baby. And then his -2 is destroy target creature, draw a card. So just a fantastic ability there. And then we would like to, if we can proliferate this, we can ultimate it immediately for you get an emblem with creatures you control, get +3/+3, and have trample. So again, really looking to play this and then proliferate. Kaya Intangible Slayer is a 7 mana 6 loyalty planeswalker with hexproof. Most of the time we're going to be activating her 0 ability to draw 2 cards, then each opponent makes scry 1, but she can also put a little bit of a clock on our opponents by having our opponents lose 3 life and we gain 3 life. And then finally we have removal as our -3. Liliana Dreadhorde General, 6 mana 6/6 walker. Whenever a creature you control dies, draw a card. So this is great to generate blockers. And also, if our blockers die while defending our planeswalkers, we get more card advantage. And often we are going to be activating the -4 to have each player sack 2 creatures, which can absolutely devastate certain decks like Voltron decks. But most of the time, I think we're going to be using it to generate a token when we don't need that removal ability. Nicol Bolas, Dragon God. Oh, and then the ultimate for Liliana, actually, let me jump back here. Each opponent chooses a permanent they control of each permanent type and sacks the rest. So this is one of those abilities that's essentially going to immediately close out the game for our opponents unless they want to really stick around with almost no lands. Nicol Bolas Dragon God is a rather color-intensive planeswalker, so I would be very careful seeing this in your hand to make sure you have all of the black to cast it. This says Nicol Bolas has all loyalty abilities of all other planeswalkers on the battlefield. It has -3 destroy target creature or planeswalker, and then its own +1 is even amazing as well. That can generate us card advantage. And then finally, it has a -8, which is a win the game on the spot. Most of the time, each opponent who doesn't control legendary creature planeswalker loses the game. Nicol Bolas God Pharaoh is going to be essentially a giant amount of card advantage as its +2, and it enters with a giant amount of loyalty. And then its ultimate ability, which we're primarily interested in, is going to exile each non-land permanent your opponents control, again, effectively closing out the game. If we don't want that card advantage, we can get it in a different way by activating its +1. Each opponent exiles 2 cards from his or her hand. Nicol Bolas Planeswalker, yet another Nicol Bolas card. 8 mana, 5 loyalty Planeswalker. It's removal on the plus, it's removal on the minus, just depending on what you need out of the way. And then it can essentially end the game for one opponent by dealing 7, having them discard 7 cards, then sacked 7 permanents, which can be very devastating for one player in particular. Nissa Ascended Animus is going to help us close out via combat because it is an 8 mana, 7 loyalty planeswalker, and a lot of the time we're going to be slamming this and activating its -7 immediately to give ourselves, until end of turn, creatures you control get +1/+1 for each forest you control and gain trample. And in a deck that is so focused on ramping out forests, this will be at least +5/+5. And then we can also have the option to create these large tokens where X will be equal to Nissa's loyalty. The only caveat with that is that you need to be careful about her loyalty and getting attacked because their power and toughness will shrink if she is focused. Soren Markov is an interesting choice here, and I've been considering swapping this out for another card advantage planeswalker. However, I think that his -3 is too valuable to not have in the deck. 4 mana, 4 loyalty, 6 mana planeswalker. Most of the time, we're going to be slamming the -3 for target opponent's life total becomes 10, which will get around all of the life gain shenanigans in the format, or in an emergency can even gain us life if needed. And then it also has some very niche case removal because we can deal 2 damage to a little utility creature. And then finally, its Mindslaver effect as its ultimate is decent. It doesn't necessarily end a player's game, but it can definitely devastate a player's board if we're able to take control of that player's next turn. Soren Grim Nemesis, 6 mana, 6 loyalty planeswalker, +1 is going to generate us card advantage and burn our opponents. Its -X is going to be removal for creatures or planeswalkers and gain us some life. And then our -9 is going to then generate a bunch of tokens onto the field to swarm our opponents out of the game. And they do have a lifelink so that even if they are board wiped, for example, we'll be able to at least survive another couple of turns. Then we have Teferi, Master of Time, one of the best planeswalkers in the deck. 3 loyalty, 4 mana walker. You may activate loyalty abilities of Teferi anytime on any player's turn, anytime you can cast an instant. We're going to be hammering that +1 over and over once per turn, or rather 4 times per turn cycle, I should say. Draw a card, then discard a card. This is going to guarantee that we hit our loot drops or that we can get rid of lands out of our hand. And I would say most of the time this can activate at least 3 times. So at minimum, we'll be able to loot 3 times off of Teferi, and then it can also get rid of scary creatures if we need on its minus ability, and all the time we're going to be climbing towards that -10 of take 2 extra turns after this one, which will eventually ensure that we close out the game with all of that value. Ugin the Spirit Dragon, 8 mana, 7 loyalty planeswalker. Its +2 is going to be some tiny removal. Most of the time, we're going to be playing it for its -X. Exile each permanent with CMC X or less. That's 1 or more colors. So basically a very expensive board wipe. And then his ultimate is going to also generate a ton of value, gain 7 life, draw 7 cards, then put up to 7 permanent cards from your hand onto the battlefield if we are able to reach it with. And if we plus it, that gets Ugin to 9, and then it only takes 1 more proliferate from there or some extra synergy like Oath of Teferi on the field to get it up to the ultimate status. Vraska Betrayal Sting is a 6 mana, 6 loyalty planeswalker, but it can be cast for 5 with 2 less loyalty counters. Most of the time, we're going to be hitting the 0 to draw a card and lose a life, and Proliferate, which will then increase Vraska's loyalty up to 7. Its -2 is a nice removal ability for creatures, and its -9 is going to essentially lose the game for 1 player by giving them 9 poison counters, and then it just takes 1 Proliferate effect to win the game from there. Vraska Relic Seeker, 6 mana, 6 loyalty planeswalker, create a token. Its +2 is what we're going to be activating it for most of the time. However, we can also have removal as its -3, and then its -10 is again basically a game-ending ability for 1 player where the life total becomes 1. Vronos Masked Inquisitor, 5 mana, 5 loyalty planeswalker. Most of the time, we're going to be hitting its +1 to have up to 2 other target planeswalkers we control phase out at the beginning of the next end step. But I will say its -2 is also very solid because we can return up to 1 target non-land permanent for each opponent that player controls to its owner's hand. Essentially, there's a rogue that does that. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but I'll throw it up on the screen in post editing. And then his ultimate ability is not as relevant. We're really playing Vronos for his +1 and -2 abilities. And just a quick commentary too. I think that as the game ages, bounce effects become more and more valuable because as the game speeds up, the ability to just return something to your opponent's hand for a turn will matter a ton. The game could look entirely different by the time that player's next turn comes around. And so that ability can be devastating if we need to, if we want to keep hammering it over and over. And Vronos gives us 5 loyalties, so we can actually do that 2 times in a row if needed. All right, so those are the walkers in the deck. Let's cover our counter support cards. How are we actually going to get these walkers to ultimate? Well, Deep Blow Skate is going to be able to double the number of loyalty counters on any number of our planeswalkers. Doubling Season is going to double our loyalty counters when our planeswalkers enter and also when they activate their abilities. Acre Moon Gauntlet is fantastic to have with multiple planeswalkers on the field because if they each proliferate, then your planeswalker loyalty will increase a ton, and quite often enough that your opponents simply can't keep up with the amount of loyalty that they have to get through to keep the deck down. Oath of Teferi is going to flicker something if we need to reset, or rather use our planeswalker abilities again to continue, let's say, removing creatures off our opponent's boards from minus abilities. But then this says you may activate the loyalty abilities of planeswalker control twice each turn rather than only once, which is really why we're playing the card, but it does have that flicker effect for extra utility. Planewide Celebration is going to be an I Win the Game card because it is a 7-mana sorcery. Choose 4. You may choose the same mode more than once. Most of the time, we're going to be proliferating all 4 times to get our planeswalkers up to that ultimate status. However, if we need the extra board presence, we can divert some of those modes to the token creation, or if we need to recover from a massive board wipe, then we can return permanent cards from our graveyard to our hand to stay in the game. Resourceful Defense is, I look at this as an 8-mana enchantment because we want to play it and then we want to activate its ability right away. Now it says whenever a permanent you control leaves the battlefield, if it had counters on it, put those counters on target permanent you control. So it allows our walkers to store loyalty counters onto Resourceful Defense, but most of the time we're going to be using its activated ability to move counters from one planeswalker onto another, which will allow us to ultimate right away. Vorinclex is a 6-mana 6/6 trample haste creature that's going to allow us to double our loyalty counters on each of our planeswalkers, and then it will have any counters that our opponents try to put on our creatures or us. So incidentally hating on poison decks there, but ultimately this will function as Doubling Season to double our counters. And then finally, once we have all of our walkers out on the field, how are we going to be able to refill our hand? There we have Black Market Connections, which can be a ramp spell and draw spell early in the game, so we definitely want to be playing this as early as we possibly can. There's a new card from Doctor Who called Great Intelligence's Plan, which is kind of cute for this deck. It's a 6-mana sorcery, draw 3 cards, then target opponent faces a villainous choice. They discard 3 cards, or you may cast a spell from your hand without paying its mana cost. So most of the time you're going to be targeting the person who is the most behind, that just simply cannot afford to discard 3 cards, effectively ending their game. So they're almost always going to let you play the card for free, and so this will give us a walker from our hand onto the field if they're not smart. Protection Racket is going to function great in a high CMC deck because it's a 3-mana enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, repeat the following process for each opponent in turn order. Reveal the top card of your library. That player may pay life equal to that card's mana value. If they do, exile that card. Otherwise, put it into your hand. So again, if once we're revealing 6 and 7 mana walkers off of this, our opponents would be smart. They would be smart to take the damage because ultimately the walker will theoretically generate us more value in the long run. So you can look at this as either a burn spell that continues to push towards game closure, or to just put cards into our hand, which is excellent. Tesseract's Gambit is going to be essentially a divination that also proliferates, which is great synergy in this deck. And then Vivisurgeon's Insight is, again, not super efficient because it's only a 5-mana draw 3, but because that proliferate is stapled onto there, I tend to think of this card as a 3-mana draw 3, and you pay 2 to proliferate, which I'm happy to do in one card, especially considering the fact that we're running only 5 cards that really net us cards into our hand. So we want to make the use of every card that actually sits in our hand. Speaking of that, Emergent Ultimatum I already discussed, so we'll skip that one. But some random bombs that we're just happy to hit off of the Prismatic Bridge upkeep trigger is Coma Cosmos Certain, a 6/6 serpent that can be countered. At the beginning of each upkeep, create a 3/3 token, and then we can sack another serpent to either tap target permanent. Its activated abilities can't be activated this turn, which is great for commanders with powerful activated abilities, or it becomes indestructible end of turn, so essentially this can always survive a board wipe, which is very nice. And then we have Nyxbloom Ancient, just a format staple for any deck that wants to generate a ton of mana, which we are certainly looking to do. And so this is great to just hit randomly off of the Prismatic Bridge. And even if we have to hard cast this and pass, then we still absolutely go off next turn, and it is a must remove type of threat. Finally, we're playing it Teferi's Protection to protect all of our walkers, and we have the extra flavor of it being Teferi that protects our board. Well, we certainly don't have any Teferi Planeswalker. Oh, we do have one Teferi Planeswalker to maintain that flavor, but he makes an extra appearance in Teferi's Protection here. This can guarantee that we make it to the next turn, essentially, so that our walkers can continue to ultimate and guarantee one more ability activation. All right, so that is essentially the deck, everybody. Again, we're really looking to just explode with value by cheating out our various planeswalkers. And then I'll briefly talk about the mana base here. This mana base is very focused on hitting colors. If we look at our macro statistics here, the land analysis, we're running essentially 25 mana sources of each color, with the exception of green, which has one extra. We have 11 tapped lands, 27 untapped lands, 11 lands that we're going to take damage from, one utility land, which is Lorien Revealed, and then 22 are fetchable. Lorien Revealed is in the deck because it color fixes us, having that island cycling ability. It can search for any island, not just a basic island, and it can draw us 3 cards if we draw this card in the late game, which is great. But you'll notice that a lot of these are really just either lands that get us all 5 colors, such as Command Tower and Exotic Orchard. Fetch lands can help us get all of our triumphs, and so most of the time these are going to be tapped tri-lands. But in the case that you need the untapped mana, they can search out our OG duels, something like a Plateau, or for example a Taiga. And then the rest of these we do run just a lot of color fixing lands, Plaza of Heroes, etc., etc. We are running 5 basics in the deck, because we have a lot of cards that will search for basics out of our deck. Cultivate will grab 2, let's see, Kodama's Reach will grab 2, Rampant Growth will grab 1, and so we want to have 5 lands, all 5 colors available to grab from those effects. And yeah, that is the deck. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Once again, I will release a companion video where you guys can actually see all of this this list in action, and I'll goldfish it up to about turn 7 or 8 2 or 3 times. So that is the video. Once again, if you guys enjoyed this deck tech, please leave a like on it. It helps me with the algorithm and it helps me to grow my channel. If you like this kind of content, I make deck techs like this on the regular, so feel free to subscribe for more Magic Gathering content and deck techs. And that's it. So with that out of the way, I will hopefully see you all in the next one.